seen those cute little license plates with the handprint, and that's Kids First. And the extra money that goes to purchasing those license plates, it only goes to organizations whose mission is the prevention of child maltreatment. And since we're Prevent Child Abuse Indiana, we receive a great deal of support from the Kids First Trust Fund, and we always want to give them a big shout out. It enables us to be able to do these programs for free, and our other trainings, help support our councils, provide materials. So if you're getting your license plate renewed, maybe think about it, plus it's a really cute license plate. We also want to thank the Department of Child Services. They have also stepped in with some extra funding when needed and support. And they've also been some, really great partners with us over the years. So, we want to give them a big shout out as well. So again, thank you so much for being here. And I'm really excited that we're having Christy here with us, and you'll see why very, very soon. As soon as she starts speaking, you'll know why this workshop is going to be so special. So Christy Gauss, she's the co-founder of Ignite Wellbeing, and she brings a depth of experience as a social worker who has dedicated her career to addressing child, youth, and adult well-being. Her experience includes ownership of SCP Consultants, a consulting company focused on supporting whole child development in schools. She's also the former mental health facilitator for the Indiana School of Mental Health Initiative at Indiana University, as well as the System of Care Coordinator for the Indiana Department of Education. And I can definitely attest that her strengths lie in collaboration, building connections, and sort of that big picture thinking. Christy lives in Indianapolis with her husband. They have 2 grown children. She's an advanced practitioner in mind-body medicine. She earned her BA in political science from George Washington University and her MSW from Indiana University. She currently serves on the boards for the Children's Policy and Law Initiative and Better Youth Outcomes. And she believes that to foster well-being in our organizations and communities and the world, we must each begin by healing ourselves. So it is my immense pleasure to introduce Christy Gauss.
Sandy, thank you so much. It is such a pleasure to be here today. And she built me up really high. I'm not sure I deserved all of that, but I'm so grateful to be here. To Sandy and to Catherine and to P. Kane and to all of you on a Friday who are sitting here to talk about your well-being. I hope if you leave with nothing else today, you will really leave feeling empowered and with permission to really address your own well-being. And I hope you are able to take a breath during this time. I always wish we were together. I love that virtually we can bring people from all over the state and perhaps across the country. And Sandy has said sometimes even from across the world, but at the same time, connection is so important. And so I encourage all of you during this presentation. We have a relatively small group, which is kind of lovely for presentations like this. So if you have questions or something you want to share, we're going to have some space where we can share in the chat, or people can come online if they want and share. And I encourage you to put things up there. Catherine's been nice enough to say that she will keep an eye on the chat, and she will let me know if there's any questions that arise. And so as we begin, I really just kind of want to set the stage. Sandy was lovely in sharing my bio. And so this is what we'll be covering today. We're going to be talking about why it's important. It's always kind of important to talk about why it's important to make this space in our lives to address caregiver well-being, understanding the science of stress and self-regulation. So we're going to dig into a little bit about understanding our stress responses and our self-regulation responses, and how truly we are wired to be self-healing, especially in connection with one another. And we're going to practice a bunch of skills. We only have an hour and a half today. And so I also, as Catherine said, you'll have a resource after. I'm going to highlight a lot of things. We're going to touch on some skills and do some practicing, but you're also going to walk away with a resource where you can dig into these skills on your own after the presentation is over. And so hopefully you will feel like you walk away with some kind of a plan and empowered, like Sandy said, to really start to address your well-being and perhaps the well-being in the organizations that you work with. And so I always, prior to this, I actually want to, I had a slide. No, I don't, it's not, doesn't seem to be there, but we're going to do a quick check-in. This is actually a strategy, if you will, a skill that I bring into a lot of the work I do, whether I'm in a meeting with just a couple of people or we're in a larger meeting. We just start with a breath and a check-in of where we are in the present moment. There is research, perhaps some of you follow Brene Brown, which I do, and she has done research that shows that we as as adults, we talk a lot about this with our kids, teaching them how to recognize their emotions, verbalize their emotions, how they're feeling in their body as indicators of their emotions. Adults themselves, the research says, we are not very good at it. On an average, and on average, the average adult can only recognize 3 primary emotions in themselves and other people. Happy, sad, angry, right? Those are the emotions, but so much more is underneath. And that space of understanding what's underneath and just speaking it out loud with one another is a powerful source of moving towards well-being and wellness and healing one another. And so I'm gonna share where I am. We're gonna start with just a short breath at the beginning, because I usually start a meeting with a breath and then a quick check-in. It usually doesn't take any time, and it centers whoever you're with. And so we're going to practice that at the beginning of this. And so I'll just invite you, and again, this will be a short breath. We're going to do a longer one into this presentation, but if you feel comfortable, go ahead and close your eyes. And just breathe in deeply through the nose and out through the mouth. Just sitting in your chair with your feet flat on the floor. And your back and your neck and your head comfortably aligned so you can engage that breath fully, letting your belly go soft. Just coming into the present moment. Noticing where you're holding tension and just breathing into that space. As thoughts come, let them come. It's what brains do. Acknowledge them and let them go. Just returning to the breath in the present moment. Let's take 2 more deep, full breaths in and out at your own pace. And then as you're ready, begin to stretch and open your eyes. Just a moment of peace. And if you would check in the chat, I will check in with you how I'm doing this present moment. I did a little bit of breathing this morning, and I'm checking in. I'm a little stressed in a positive way. I would say that I have a little bit of stress because I wanted to be present with you all and to deliver a good presentation. And so I had to upregulate. And so I have a little bit of stress with that, but I'm also feeling tremendous gratitude to be in front of all of you today to talk about your well-being and to build some connections among each of us. And so I wonder if you all would kind of just check in with me, just check in where you are at this moment and just kind of speak it out loud as a group. And so we will start here. I'm going to start actually with a quote. You will hear me today talk a lot about 2 things really, self-awareness and compassion. And compassion is one of my favorite words. It really takes empathy, which I know all of you have by the nature of the work that you do, and it turns empathy into action. And so I just want you to take in these words. They're from a book that I love called The Rhythm of Compassion, and I think this really helps to set the stage for what we're going to talk about today. So breathing in represents caring for self, and breathing out signifies compassion for others. There's a strong tendency in many compassionate people to breathe out, 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 and to neglect the precious in-breath. Our American culture does not encourage breathing in. Rather, it pushes us towards constant activity and gouges our worth by how busy we are. This attitude affects everyone, but it especially applies to people in service professions and those whose lives involve full-time caregiving, which I know includes all of you. If we have compassion for ourselves, we will continually become a healing presence for others without saying a word or doing anything extraordinary. We will convey kindness by our presence, by our attitude toward their suffering and our own. And so with that, we can't really talk about this without talking about the backdrop of the world we live in and the work that you all do. And what we know is we live in a world that is in need of healing. It is in need of healing. Relationally, it's in need of healing. Physically, it's in need of healing emotionally. And I'm just pulling up some things here. I've been doing this presentation for a little while now, and I could just keep adding to these slides and changing them out. And this is the backdrop of how kids are the kids in your lives, right? What we're experiencing as human beings. But on top of all of this, again, by the very nature of what you do, there are additional stressors because you're compassionate and you move in these spaces of being caretakers for other people. We are more prone to stress. And we tend to, and I'm a social worker, as Sandy shared, in these helping professions, in these caring caregiver positions, we tend to wear it as a badge of honor, or pouring out, and neglecting ourselves. And we can very quickly move into these spaces where stress is impacting us across our lives and the work that we do in our relationships with other people, in our physical bodies. And we're going to really dig into this because so much happens on the unconscious level. And like my bio said, I have become a firm believer in being trained in mind-body medicine. I've been guilty about talking about this and not bringing it into my own life, but to really heal other people and to be in this world to serve and change the world, including all the kiddos that you serve. We have to start by healing ourselves first and foremost. The question is, how do we heal ourselves? And it turns out we are wired for self-healing. Before we talk about that, though, I really want to touch on something. And I talk a lot to educators and caregivers across the state. And as I start this presentation, something inevitably happens with compassionate people who want to make a difference in the world. How do I bring all of this to my kids? Like, how do I bring this to the youth that I serve? And the beauty of mind-body medicine is it is deeply researched and can be brought to kids as young as 2 and 3. But I'm going to start with the slide because this really is about you today. And so I don't know how many read the book Self-Reg by Stuart Schenker. I'm going to read a little bit out of this today. Actually, it's one of my favorite books. When my kids have make me a grandchild, hopefully someday this will be required reading for them. I wish I had it when my kids were little. But this is a quote from Dr. Schenker, who wrote that book. Self-regulation in our children, youth, and students starts with how well we can identify and reduce our own stressors and how well we can stay calm and attentive when we're interacting with a child, youth, or student. In working the schools, there are so many beautiful programs, so many beautiful things can be integrated into the work that we all do with our youth and our children. But what I've come to fully believe is the most beautiful thing we can bring to them is our own self-regulation, to understand how our own stress and self-regulation responses affect us, how we can bring mindfulness and other skills into our own lives, then we naturally start to bring it to all of those around us. And so you've all heard of this. You can't pour from an empty cup. In order to be there and self-regulate a young person, we have to be regulated ourselves. And so let's get back to being self-healing. And so again, I'm certified from the Center for Mind-Body Medicine. So I want to touch a little bit on who they are and encourage you. A lot of the resources I'll be sharing are from them directly. And so it was founded over 30 years ago by Dr. James Gordon. And you can see his background there. He was also the head of complementary and alternative medicine under the Bush and Clinton White Houses. And under the program that he has created through the Center for Mind-Body Medicine, over 10,000 people all over the world, across cultures, because it really just taps into our shared humanity, our shared humanness of how we are wired for self-healing. You don't have to be a mental health professional to deliver this model. It is a worldwide leader in making self-care and group support and community building central to healthcare. It really started out of healthcare. We all know our medical model. The core of it is diagnosis and treatment, and then maybe we've got some prevention and some promotion on the outside of that. And it flips that model and understanding how our physiology is holistic. And when we really understand our physiology, our ability to be self-healing and in connection with one another. It is highly research-based. The depth of their research, and you can get on their website, is extensive across all the skills they use. And it's important, they have gone in the aftermath of wars all over the world, as you can see, natural disasters such as in Haiti. January 6th, they had a whole team that came after that. Right now, they've got a whole team over responding to the crisis coming out of Ukraine. They also work Native Americans and veterans. The beauty of what's happened here in Indianapolis out of Eskenazi Hospital is the head of their hospital actually went through the preliminary part of this training, believed in it so much, trained their staff before COVID. She will say it is what got their staff through COVID. And then they believed that it shouldn't just be with us, it should be brought to our community. And so through a grant through the Simon Foundation, I have been trained with some other people. And the beauty of what's happening here, it's not in response to a crisis, although it was used after the FedEx shooting happened and many things, but it's been across systems in a preventative way where we're really promoting everyone's health. It'll be there in times of crisis, but also just like I'm coming to you today, how can we bring it so we create a community and a culture of well-being across not only Indianapolis, but across the state, because it continues to grow. And so I always like to point out, you're really part of a movement today with however many of us are on here. We're really trying to create a movement out of this work. And so what is mind-body medicine? And so we're going to dig into the science. It'll be the beginning of this. It's going to be about 15 minutes, and we're going to dig into skills. But it's important to understand the biology, if you will, the research behind mind-body medicine, and really how beautifully we are made to be self-healing. And so it explores the powerful connections between our minds, our bodies, the environments in which we operate in. And we're going to talk about spirituality as a strong piece of this and really define that as well. It is an approach that emphasizes each person's capacity to know themselves better and to arrive at their own solutions. It's really a strengths-based model. This is not the exact quote from The Wizard of Oz, but at some point, Glinda the Good Witch says something along the lines, you had the answers within you all along. And it's really a model that leans into that fully, especially when we do this in connection with one another, not trying to fix each other, but to just share where we are in our lives and bring self-awareness together and just speak our humanness with each other. It's innately relational. You will walk away with a lot of personal strategies today, but I'm going to keep emphasizing a huge part of this is how we do this in connection with one another in our workplaces and our personal lives. And I always, when I lead a group, there's a skills group model to this. First of all, I always grow through these, but I always wish, how do we not just function this way in the world with one another? It would just solve so many things. And it's not just about relaxing, right? It's not just about taking bubble baths and all of those things, however they speak to you are important, but it's recognizing that the difficult things in our lives, us being able to navigate them and grow through them and being able to do that. We can't always control, I don't know about you, but I can't control the stressors and the inputs, right? The stimuli that are coming at me all the time, but I can learn how to navigate them in a way that helps me to grow and helps me to become self-aware and helps me to be in better connection with other people. And it's a model that really does that. And it demonstrates that mind-body practices really improve our physical well-being, our mental health, and in many ways, and they decrease the stress hormones in our bodies that we're going to kind of talk about. You'll see over on the left, you see the circles, regulation, awareness, expression. The whole model is designed to bring you through this process, to understand how we move through this process. And then we don't always do this. I rarely do this very well, but without having intentional practice in my life. So how do we regulate? How do we relax in the present moment? How do we become aware of how stress is impacting us? And how do we move through those and express it in positive ways so we can really lead ourselves to healing and to wellness and to the futures that we all want to create for ourselves in intentional ways. And it's important, I think, to really define spirituality. People can have all kinds of definitions on this. So I'm going to explain what we mean by that third wheel, It's mind, mind, body, and spirit. And so what are we really talking about when we're talking about the spiritual aspect of mind, body medicine? So you see the quote here, no matter how you connect with it, the spiritual dimension is what energizes and inspires your life and gives it meaning. The spiritual is not separate from, but intrinsic to who we are. So search for meaning, connection to something larger than ourselves. So spirituality versus religion. Religion, however anybody may or may not practice it, is how we organize our spiritual beliefs. And so that's why it's called organized religion. And so every religion is based in spirituality, but you can be spiritual without being religious. Hopefully that makes sense. And so I love to point to this study that I learned I had never heard about. Some of you may have heard of it. I learned about it through mind body medicine, and it's a Harvard grant study. It was done, as you can see, it started back in the 1930s. It is the most extensive longitudinal study of what contributes to human flourishing and happiness. And so it was done through, at the time, it was all undergraduate men because it was Harvard and they did not have any women there at the time. Since then, they've expanded the study to include diverse women and diversity across all aspects. But in studying this, they studied every trait you could of a human being, every anthropological trait. So where did you live? How much income? How many kids did you have? Like anything you could study, they studied it over the course of 75 years, however long these people lived. And what they found in this study, and they continue to find over and over again as the study continues to date, is it's not how much money you have or how many vacations you take or all the things we may point to about what contributes to human flourishing and happiness. It's that there are 8 what they call spiritual qualities or emotions that really contribute to human flourishing or happiness. Forgiveness, gratitude, equanimity, which is that ability to stay at peace and stay at calm, all wonder, joy, compassion, and love. And I love this as our definition of understanding spirituality within these domains. As human beings, we can all relate to every single one of these emotions. And so spirituality is literally what shifts us from why is this happening to me to what might I learn from this. I think this mirrors the trauma-informed response to me. Well, how might I grow from this experience? Can't control what's coming at me, but I can control my response to it. And we're going to talk a lot about breath today. And so spirit and breath are often combined. And we're going to dig into this a little later in the presentation. But breath, we're going to find out from a biological standpoint, is really the center of balancing and connecting our mind and body spirit connection. And so we're going to talk more about that in our presentation today. And so we can't really talk about this without having a really good understanding of stress and our stress response. And so the next 3 slides are going to dig into that in a very, high level view that I hope helps you understand how beautifully you actually are made to be self-healing. So positive stress. I don't know how many of us, I don't know about you, but I never go, hey, I'm stressed. I'm stressed. We don't ever use it in a positive way, but positive stress is actually really, really important in our lives. Positive stress is what upregulates us and helps us get ready for whatever is going on in our day. I had to have positive stress to get on this presentation with all of you today. I have to have positive stress if I'm going to go out and do some kind of physical activity. I'm trying to rise to a challenge or new social interaction. We talk a lot with our teachers. Positive stress is actually what learning is. It's new, novel information, right, that a student has to rise to the challenge and take in and be able to accomplish within a supportive environment. And then we have tolerable stress, which is more stress. I think all of us can relate to it, especially these days. It's more stress than we would like in our lives, so it's more serious than we would like, but it's temporary. And it is buffered. We have protective factors that help us move through this. I think we all know 2 people can go under the same stressors, and one is able to continue functioning well and one is not. And so one is able to move that into a tolerable space because of those protective factors. But it's that red line right there that we all have to be careful with. There is research that says 6 times every second we're scanning our environment for our level of safety, right? It's at the unconscious level. Just take that in because we're going to continue to go to understanding the unconscious level and needing to bring it to self-awareness. And so the primary purpose of our brains is to keep us alive. Everything else comes after that. And that's what our stress response is all about. And so we are constantly scanning our environment. Is this new? Is this novel? What is my level of safety here? Is it familiar? Or do I feel safe? Do I feel comfortable? We're constantly scanning our environments, and anything, right, that is something new or novel, unfamiliar, we're registering as stress. And so we've got positive stress in that space, tolerable, but we can very quickly move into that toxic stress space. And that's the area that becomes dangerous for all of us. It's prolonged activation of the stress response without protective factors. And so this is really, I love the visual of thinking of it as our gas and our brakes. So our central nervous system, our autonomic nervous system, which is kind of the control center of our stress response, is receiving inputs. And based on these inputs, we're upregulating, we're putting on the gas, right? Which is our fight or flight. You see the picture right there. When we do that, we upregulate. Our heart rates go up, our blood pressure goes up, our digestion goes offline, our blood sugar levels go up, all of these things you see, because we need to upregulate for the moment. It's important that we're able to do that. And then we can engage our rest and digest system, or our brakes, by calming ourselves. And all the opposite things happen. Our blood pressure goes down, our heart rates go down, all of these things. And so this is us. Hopefully this blue line is us in homeostasis, in balance, in regulation. I think there can be sometimes a misconception that us being self-regulated is when it's no stress, like we have no stress. But self-regulation is positive stress, recovery, positive stress, self-regulation, all day long, doing this all day long. In school, we talk a lot how important it is to hold space for our students, to use that energy to upregulate and to give them space to recover, because that is how learning happens. It's how all the positive behavior happens in our classrooms, but it's the same for us as adults. But without having awareness of how that stress is impacting us and where we are in that regulation process, we can easily get stuck in these green lines, which is basically our brakes getting stuck in overdrive, or our rest and digest getting stuck in overdrive. And that's where we get into a lot of trouble. But we are wired to not get in those spaces when we build self-awareness and relaxation and positive expression into our lives, and we really understand how beautifully our physiology is. And so, right, we tend to separate in our societies, in our systems as human beings, our mental health, emotional health, right, from our physical health, how we're feeling in our bodies, how physically we're doing, and vice versa. When the truth is, what we think, what we believe, our attitudes, our emotional well-being profoundly impacts our physical well-being, and how we feel in our bodies, how well we are in our bodies, our physiology, our physical sensations profoundly impact our emotional well-being and our cognitive well-being. And running through that is that thread of spirituality. And so understanding this and how to access those connections is literally the space where we move into healing. And we flip that model from diagnose and treat to prevention and even more promotion of our own well-being. And so what are the effects when our cortisol is up all the time, our blood sugar, our cholesterol, all of these things, our bodies are responding this way to stress all the time. You can see and you can imagine what happens to us in our bodies, in our minds, and in our spirits, all of the things and many more listed here. But when we're able to intervene in this process, we have the flip, right? When we engage that self-regulation response, we learn about our autonomic nervous system, how it impacts all parts of our lives. We reduce the effects of stress. You can kind of go down there. It helps you to we're going to talk about that stuck feeling that we have, being aware of that and moving through those spaces. All of these things listed here. My favorite one here, to be honest with you, is it restores hope. I don't know about you, but I need more hope these days. And it helps you to move into that space. And to capture this, I love this quote. And I'm going to ask you to take it in. Some of you may know of Viktor Frankl. He is a Holocaust survivor. And this is a quote from him. And so I'm going to read it, and I ask you to really take it in. Because to me, this is what mind, body medicine, I have mindfulness and meditation, but it's mind, body medicine really, in a nutshell, what it's all about. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response is our growth and our freedom. And that sounds so simple. And so mind body medicine is all about that space. We as communities and organizations and human beings, just like my beginning quote from Rhythm of Compassion, we are not good at that space. We are not good at between what is coming at us, understanding how it's impacting us, what our emotions are telling us, what stress is telling us in our lives. Sit it with it, understand it, become self-aware with it, and then express it in positive ways. And so mind body medicine is all about really building those spaces in our lives in the ways that resonate with us. And so I just want to have a pause, because sometimes I think it's hard on a virtual call to always be able to engage everybody if they want a moment. So we're kind of ending the first part, which was the science behind all of this and why this is important. And I just want to give a pause if anybody has any questions or anything they wanted to share or any key takeaways that they had, please do so. I'll encourage you. I always learn so much from these myself when we all share with each other. So, and even if it's like, Christy, that didn't make sense, I would please don't hesitate to say that. Go ahead, Sandy.
I was just going to say, if you want to unmute or put in the chat.
Say that again.
If people would like to unmute or
they can unmute if they want, for sure. Yep. Thank you. I think Maria, or maybe she's just trying to connect to Ivy. Okay. All right. We will keep moving, but don't hesitate to like, hey, I got something. So you don't have to hear my voice the whole time. I see something in the chat. Let me make sure there is. It's nice to be able to visually see the different levels of stress that there are. Yeah, I agree with that 100%. Okay, so we are going to move. This slide is going to date me a little bit. So we're going to move into the skills portion of this part of the next presentation. And so I'm going to probably throw quite a bit at you here with the experiences, because everybody has different things that resonate with them at different times. But again, I've given you a resource at the end of this where you can really dig into some of them. And I'll encourage you to try something new. We're going to talk about that at the end of this, to kind of just to be open to some new practices. And so I want to point out at the beginning, mind body medicine has quite a few of their own. I'm going to touch on some of those, and then some that aren't mind body medicine skills that I have learned in doing this work. But I also wanted to kind of point them out to you. And I've given you a resource where you can get online, and Dr. Gordon himself actually leads you through a lot of these. Skills groups themselves are all about, we practice them, we share them together, we have there's a skills group model that really embraces all of this. But I wanted to highlight them here. And you'll see meditation, concentrative, awareness, and expressive. We're going to really talk about quite a bit today, but you see all of the other ones listed here. And you will see at the bottom of this, the peer-to-peer support piece, how people do this in connection with one another and share with one another is a huge piece of the model. And self-awareness, touching on everything else, all of the skills that we'll be talking about are really meant to bring about self-awareness in our lives. As we talked about, so much happens at the unconscious level that bringing it to awareness is critical. And so our thoughts, our feelings, our beliefs, how we're feeling in our bodies, all of these things and how they're impacting us and how we can make choices to respond is the space of self-awareness, but it's also the space of compassion. We all love a good iceberg slide. And I think it's so important in discussing this work. We tend to respond to ourselves, get frustrated with ourselves and others from behavior that we see at the tip of the iceberg. When understanding what's happening under the iceberg, it's that space, and the Viktor Frankl quote is to really be understanding that is the space of compassion first and foremost for ourselves about why the behavior is happening, why we've moved into certain spaces in our lives. And you can see this quote. Many of you may have been introduced to the average childhood experiences science. And this is a quote from one of the principal investigators, because that the ACEs science and the science of mind-body medicine are exactly the same science. And you see this quote: the most obvious symptom is not necessarily the problem. Keep this in mind for everything that you see. And so to me, this is the self-awareness is what kind of lives under this space. And it's the space where we move to compassion, first and foremost for ourselves. And so mindful or mindful. Sandy was on with her dog, was snoring actually, as we were getting ready for your presentation. And I love this. I also am a pet lover myself and feel like they are a sense of well-being and self-regulation for me. So I just kind of love this. We spend a lot of our times as humans, because we are wired to be paying attention to our safety. We're just wired to be thinking, ruminating about past stresses and future stressors. It's the way our minds work. And so we look like that person walking on the left, and there's our dogs, right? Or our horses or our whatever in the present moment. And we have to intentionally move into that present moment awareness. And one of the main ways that we do this is through breath and meditation. And so we are going to do a meditative practice, but I'm going to talk about it for just a minute. So, because again, this is something else that can have a lot of misconceptions about what it really is and why it's beneficial. And so there's 3 types of meditations. There's concentrative. And so that's when we concentrate on something, which can be a prayer or a mantra or a visualization. So we're really, and the reason for that is so that we are able to kind of shut out all these ruminations that our mind does naturally and concentrate on something so that we can bring ourselves into present moment stillness and awareness and self-regulation. And then there's awareness meditation, which is also known as mindfulness. And so all it is non-judgmental attention to the present moment. I don't know how many of you maybe have driven down a road. I know this happens to me all the time, and I'll be like, how did I get here? Did I go through a stoplight? Did I hit somebody? Like, I don't have any recollection of what just happened. Or perhaps you go for a walk and you haven't noticed anything because your mind looks like that picture that I just showed. And it's just, we just practice mindfulness and we engage our breath to come into the present moment. I often use gratitude in this strategy. So I'm going to drive or I'm going to walk and I'm going to notice 3 things that are beautiful or 3 things that I'm grateful for. And that will bring me into that present moment status. And what we know about meditation is the more you practice it, the more naturally it becomes. There is research that says if we do 20 minutes of breath work, I'll just call it breath work in a day. It doesn't have to be all at once. It can be 5 minutes here and 5 minutes here and 5 minutes here and 5 minutes here. We change our brains. We literally wire our brains differently. So we are able to come into self-regulation and present moment awareness in much more effective ways. And then the last one is expressive meditation. It is the one that is least practiced in our culture. Many other cultures embrace this more than we do. Yoga is probably the most known. But what the difference between the other 2 in this is the other 2 come straight to present moment awareness and stillness, where expressive meditations have us move to come to the same stillness and present moment awareness. And there's 2 things that regulate us the most, and it is our breath and it is movement. So that really combines both of these things. And I'm going to talk a little bit about shaking and dancing as an experiential. We're not going to do that today. I'm not going to have you do that while we're online. We just don't have time, but I'm going to point you in a direction where you can practice shaking and dancing. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how powerful that was for me. But first, I want to introduce you to your vagus nerve. And it is a huge friend of yours. And I did not know about my vagus nerve until I did the work with the Center for Mind-Body Medicine. And the vagus nerve really is our mind-body-spirit connection. And we have, take us back to 8th grade science, whatever year it was, we learned about the systems of our bodies. We have our digestive system and our circulatory system and our muscular system, our endocrine system, we can go on and on. And so all the systems of the body, except for one or the other, they're voluntary. So we have to think about them, right, in order for them to function. So our muscular and our skeletal systems are 2 examples. I have to think, and then we're going to move them. Or they're autonomic. They happen automatically. My heart rate, my circulatory system, my digestive system all happen automatically. I'm I don't have to think about them cognitively. There's one system of the body that is both autonomic and voluntary, and that is our respiratory system, our breathing. So we breathe, of course, no matter what, but you can also engage it at any time, like we just did at the beginning of this presentation. And when we calm our breath, we literally calm every other system of our body. Our heart rates go down, our blood pressure goes down, our digestive system comes online. And as we do this and we're calming our bodies and our stress systems go down, we also can calm our minds, which is the center of the spiritual connection as well, when we can turn internally and understand where we are in the present moment. And the vagus nerve is what allows us to do all of this. And so our vagus nerve runs through the base of our spine up to the base of our brain. It's what we engage when we intentionally engage that breath. And that nerve connects to every other system of our bodies. And so knowing our vagus nerve, and this is the center of meditation. Meditation has lots of connotations. It can have religious connotations, but at the end of the day, meditation is all about understanding how to engage your breath and come into present moment awareness. And so we're gonna do a little lengthier meditation just to engage that vagus nerve. That now that we have a little better understanding, some of you may practice already, and some of you may not, or some of you may be out of practice, which I can be as guilty as the next person about that. And I will keep talking about we give ourselves grace in all of this. I am sometimes on my well-being journey in a really strong way, and sometimes I'm off the wagon. We give ourselves grace and we get back on the wagon as best we can, and encourage each other to do that. But I'm saying this because it can feel uncomfortable in our busy lives to sit still. And as we engage in this, one of the main things that comes up is it is so hard for me to come into this present moment awareness and have my mind stop and be still, because we're not used to that. We're used to moving, and our mind's going. So give yourselves grace as we go through this. And I'm going to give a space to see if people would like to share what the experience was like after that. And this is a little lengthier, which could also cause, it to feel one way or another to you. So I'll go ahead and ask you again to go ahead and close your eyes if you're comfortable. And if you're not comfortable with that, go ahead and let your gaze just rest at something on the floor, just trying to shut out the external and turning internally. Your feet flat on the floor, and your neck and your back and your head comfortably aligned. Let your belly go soft so you can engage the breath fully and that vagus nerve. And at your own pace, breathing in deeply through the nose and out through the mouth. Starting to slow the breath. Perhaps starting to feel your heart rate slow. Notice where you're holding tension. Perhaps in your shoulders, releasing that tension. The area around your jaw and your forehead. Sinking into your breath, letting go. As thoughts come, just a reminder to let them go. Acknowledging them, no judgment, just returning to your breath. Perhaps to help with this, think soft as you breathe in, and belly as you breathe out. Perhaps notice the temperature of the air in your skin. Any sounds you may hear. Just coming into present moment. without judgment. Just note how your body's feeling physically, just noting, just awareness. Now do the same with how you're doing emotionally. Again, no judgment. Just where are you in the moment? Let's just take 20 more seconds or so and quiet, just to breathe in what we need. We don't honor, and won't breathe out what we don't. Just in silence, enjoying the moment. Letting go of to-dos, being present. And as we begin to end this practice together, perhaps offer just some gratitude. There's some time for ourselves, some time to breathe, some time to connect. Maybe just bring a gentle smile to your face, just a small turn of your mouth. Notice if it makes you feel differently. Let's take 2 more deep, full breaths in and out, biggest of the day. And with your last exhale, and as you're ready, begin to stretch, move. And again, as you're ready, just start to open your eyes and come back into this space. And so again, I would love if some people would share what that was like for you. It's always when we can connect with each other, you want to come online and share what that was like for you, even if it was difficult. I know I needed it. And I meditated this morning. I didn't even know I needed a moment to breathe myself in the middle of the presentation. So anybody want to share? Hope I didn't put you all to sleep.
They're so relaxed.
I lost everybody.
It was relaxing. It was relaxing, but it's just hard sometimes to focus.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree, Robin. And I practice all the time. Our minds are not, they're meant to be paying attention to everything all the time. So it takes practice.
Right.
And different things.
My mind always wanders. So it's like, yeah.
Yeah. Give yourself grace with that wandering though, too. It's what minds do. It's what minds do. Even the people that practice this and yogis, it can be hard for them to have their minds stop. And sometimes just engaging that breath for a little while is all that you really need. Just a few times. And the more you practice it, the more easily it comes to you. But I can be guilty as anybody about being out of practice. So always give yourself grace. Anybody else? Maybe you practice on your own?
We have a comment in the chat too.
Oh, good. Thanks, Sandy.
I put on some noise canceling headphones and that was very helpful.
Yeah.
But then when you started talking, I didn't realize that you were talking again.
Yeah. Sometimes my talking cannot be what people need. Sometimes, especially if you practice already, you just need, I just need to breathe for a little bit. So I'm glad you gave yourself what you need. So thank you all. And I saw in the chat, I want to acknowledge what somebody said in the chat. It felt good to acknowledge, some hard feelings that I was trying to ignore. That's a beautiful example. We're going to talk about that, the importance of that. So thank you, Jenny. Difficult to get my brain to slow down. I completely understand, Julie. Thank you for sharing that. And so we are actually, Jenny just set me up beautifully for this next part of the presentation to kind of talk about emotions and how emotions, expressing them, moving through that process of relaxing into them, expressing them and becoming aware of them and what they're telling us, and expressing them in positive ways. I don't know about you. My husband will say, Christy, you're not always good at, you feel it, and then you, with me, like express it, maybe not in the most positive ways. So that self-awareness and relaxing into them and having them understanding what they're telling us, right? First recognizing, and then what are they telling us, is a huge, one of the best ways we have to manage our stress and to grow and to heal in our lives. And so let's talk a little bit about what emotions are. And they're like a river. That's why I have this visual up here. They're always changing from moment to moment to moment. They're never staying still. And we can experience quite a few emotions all at the same time. And they're much wider and deeper than happiness, the ones that we tend to recognize: happy, anger, sadness, right? Those are the ones that we tend to express or recognize in each other, when so much more is really happening underneath the surface. And they're innocent. Think of them as data. And so what I mean by this is we tend to label our emotions. These are the good emotions. These are the positive ones that I want to express, and I want others to express, whether knowingly or unknowingly. In our society, we tend to be like, oh no, they're crying, right? Or they're angry, or they're whatever those more negative emotions we might, when we think of them as negative or positive. But emotions really are just data. It's information letting us know what is going on with us. So even when they're difficult, maybe especially when they're difficult, they are letting us know where we are, how we're feeling about stressors in our life and our actions, stimuli in our lives, we're feeling in our bodies comes out in our emotions, and our emotions can be felt within our bodies because of that mind-body-spirit connection. And so we need to stop labeling them, and we need to start using them to really help us through healing and wellness and connection with one another, because it is a beautiful human trait that we have this ability to have this data that gives us input about where we are in our lives. Not only where we are in present moment, but where we were, what our histories were that got us here to this present moment. And it's also information about understanding about how we get from where we are in the moment to where we want to go in the future. And I've already touched on this. They're intimately connected with the physical. As a social worker, I was always really good friends with the nurse in the school, because our kids would show up when there was emotional stuff going on, would actually often show up in her office with tummy aches, with headaches, with all of those things. And between the two of us interacting with each other, we could kind of help to identify when there were emotional things going on as well. It's the same with us in our lives. And often we, because of that mind-body-spirit connection, feel it first and foremost physically. It can come out as tiredness and all the things. And we talked about what cortisol does to us. And so understanding that connection is important. Often when I ask people, how are we doing? We're doing a check-in. People will say things that are actually physical traits. I'm tired, I'm exhausted, I'm feeling tense, all of those kinds of things. And again, they're only problematic. Emotions are only problematic when we get stuck in them. And so I think we can all relate to that feeling like I just feel stuck in something. And so anger can become resentment and rage, and grief can become, much deeper levels of depression and anxiety. And so it's important that we become aware and we express them in positive ways.
We have something in the chat.
Yes,
Christy.
Yes. Thank you very much for monitoring that. Like, what? As small as it, I'm going to read it out loud. So Jenny says, like, why something as small as a thrown sippy cup can trigger me some days, usually because I'm already overwhelmed. Jenny, absolutely. And my kids are old, and I relate to exactly what you said. And it's yes. And we move quickly to that response without taking those breaths, right? And stepping away and kind of understanding what else and taking care of ourselves. Jenny, thank you very much. Okay, so, and they're deeply impacted by stress. Our emotions are deeply impacted by stress. We feel, when we're in high levels of stress, we will feel our emotions at a 10 on a scale of 1 to 10. we will understand them and be aware of them at a 5, and we'll really understand where they're coming from and what they're telling us at like a 2. And so it's important we go to those spaces when the sippy cup is happening and all of those things, where we can understand where we really are so that we can express in positive ways. It's the space that my husband wants me to like take a pause with before I am reacting on many days that I sometimes do well and sometimes I don't do well. And if you've had past toxic or stress or trauma in your life, you're more prone to go into those higher levels of feeling emotions without really being aware of them. So there, even more intention has to come about bringing them to awareness so that you can express them in positive ways. And so emotions, out of all of the things, right, is really the space where, and I've already touched on this, we relax into them, become aware of them, and we express them. And so this is just showing us the process of all of that. And, you know, smile, again, I talked about how there's some things we want to elicit from ourselves, and other times, like, I can't tell you how many times in these presentations things arise for people or in the work that I do, and people just, they'll cry, and then everybody's apologizing for crying. And if maybe that's the biggest takeaway, we're not going to apologize for when we cry anymore. And I'm not wanting you all to walk around crying, but we're going to talk a little bit about how important crying is and expressing all kinds of emotions in positive ways. And so let's start with smiling and laughter. And I am certainly not saying go around and laugh out loud and smile when you're having something really heavy going on with you. But we did that little activity during the meditation where we just put a small smile on our faces. And perhaps some of you felt how that actually changed you, just even if it was a little bit, how you felt emotionally. And the truth is, smiling and laughter, and we know it's contagious. If somebody smiles at us on the street, there's mirror neurons that change actually how you feel when you see somebody else do it. But when we smile and we laugh, we actually release chemicals in our body that relieve physical and emotional pain and reduce our stressors. The beautiful thing is, crying does the same thing. When we can acknowledge how we're feeling and speak it out loud, and if crying is what comes up for us, it releases oxytocin and endorphins that do the same thing that smiling and laughter does, and reduces our pain and our stress and leads towards well-being in a positive way. And so doing this within safe environments, creating safe environments. Of course, we don't want everybody going around all the time crying and crying and crying. There's appropriate spaces to do this, of course, but it's important that we start making spaces that just allow people to be with it. We tend to, and I am still guilty of this, we want to fix and we want to take care of, right? Because we're compassionate, empathetic people. We're fixers in lots of ways. And so we want to help people to stop crying. When I have learned more about this work, when I just hold the space for people to be, or they hold the space for me and they don't try to fix me and they just let me let it out. A, I relate to them, and B, and they relate to me, and that's what I needed, and it's what other people need. They didn't need me to fix them, and so I think it's just important to point that out. And it's not just crying; it's if we have some anger in us or something like, how do we express it, but express it in positive ways. And so I'm going to touch, where are we on time? Because I want to be careful with where we are. Okay. So I'm going to talk about, I wish we had some time to do, sometimes when I've got a little bit more time, or especially if we're in person, we do one of these 2 activities. But again, you will be getting a resource where you can be guided through both of these next 2 activities through the Center for Mind Body Medicine with a recording they have online. But I do want to touch upon them, and I'd encourage you to try one or both of them. I use breath work all the time. I tend to use some of these other strategies when I notice I've moved into, I'm stuck. Something is coming, and sometimes I can identify it, and sometimes I don't have even self-awareness. I just know I'm stuck. And I tend to use one of these, when it comes up. So maybe every couple of weeks or something like that. And some resonate with me at some times, and others resonate with me at other times. So that's the beauty of having lots of different skills. And so one of them is creativity in general. This is a drawing exercise, but creating art, all of those things are a form of imagery. And so it helps to bypass that thinking mind, that ruminating mind, where we're moving all the time, and it taps into our inner knowing, our inner intuition, and we're able to express ourselves in ways that can be very difficult when we're just trying to think through something. This is a vehicle for self-discovery, and it allows you to get unstuck. It can really give you some great insights. And so I'd encourage you to get on. The activity basically leads you through these 3 drawings of drawing kind of a present moment issue, problem, or symptom. And then you rest again, and then you let something rise, and then you draw what it looks like when it's fixed. And then there's another drawing after that. And they can be pretty powerful. You don't worry what it looks like. You don't have to share. Some people do scribbles and they label it. And what I will stress is during this, and I think Dr. Gordon says it, first thought, best thought. We tend to judge like, this is what I want to, just the more you like breathe and let just things arise, let your intuition take over. What needs to arise will arise. Sometimes it's big stuff and sometimes it's smaller stuff. It's just a space for awareness and expression as that bypasses our thinking mind. And so we're not doing the experiential. I apologize. I had that up there, but I want to talk about a journaling activity. Journaling, first of all, and you see this quote from Deepak Chopra, journaling is one of the most powerful tools we have to transform our lives. I won't read this to you, but again, it forces us to transfer those ruminations, that thinking part of our brain, into coherent stories. And it enables us to move beyond the present moment to the future we want to create. Getting it down on paper can be powerful. And people journal in all kinds of ways. Feel free to type in there how you journal and how you practice this if it's something that resonates with you. This one is a very quick one, which is why I kind of love to share it. And this one is probably what I use second to breathing the most often. And so I'm going to give you an example of when I did a couple of weeks ago, and it'll take me all of 5 minutes. It took me all of 5 minutes to write and to share, just to give an example. But what it's called dialoguing, this says with a symptom, problem, issue, or emotion. And I tend to do this in the morning when I'm fresh, and I do a little bit of meditation and let whatever rises. Sometimes it's procrastination or it's something like that. It could be a minute thing, but first of all, it's that awareness of what's going on. So you're still, and you breathe deeply, and whatever rises, first thought, best thought. And then whatever it is, you give it a name. Sometimes I write a brief summary. I'll be honest, I don't often write a brief summary. So that's up to you if you kind of want to summarize what it is that's coming up for you. But what you're going to do is personify it. You can give it a name if you want, but you have a dialogue back and forth with it. You write down this dialogue. So the emotion that came up for me, and you go with your gut. You don't think about it. You just write to that emotion or symptom or issue, and it responds to you. And you write to it, and it responds to you. And you don't edit. You go with your gut. You let it just rise. The more you do it, the easier it comes to you. And so I wish we were in a room and we had time and we could do this in connection with one another. And if people wanted to share, because you've been sitting there having to listen to me, which is not always the best way for this presentation. And I am going to give you an example of one I wrote that will take me less than 5 minutes to say, and it took me less than 5 minutes to write. That gives you, I hope it'll just give you an example of how this can be used and why it's useful. And so it was the week of the last school shooting that happened in Texas. And I was actually having anger that was coming up in me, the 3 primary emotions, but I've done enough work that I knew there was something lying beneath the anger. And what came up for me that morning was hopelessness, was the emotion that was rising for me. So this is me, Christy, having a dialogue with hopelessness. And so this is what I said, this is how it went. I wrote to hopelessness. I have always tried to live in hope, no matter what is going on in my life, my work, the world. Lately, hope seems farther out of reach. I don't just think about you. I now speak out loud that I embrace you. Why am I leaning into you? And hopelessness writes, yes, I have not been a welcome guest in the past, but lately I feel like I have a room in your house. What has changed? And I write back, I feel like a fool lately, saying I still have hope for change, hope in humanity, hope in our country. The world seems off its axis, out of control. It feels like I am being a Pollyanna, still saying I'm hopeful. How dare I actually? What impact am I having? are any of us having? And hopelessness says, do I help you with these thoughts and feelings? And I write, I guess you protect me in a way. You give me permission to disengage. And hopelessness says, disengage from what? And I said, the hurt and sadness and disillusionment, the fight. And hopelessness says, so have I helped? And I write in huge letters, no. In welcoming you, all I am doing is losing me. It actually makes me feel more hurt and sadness and disillusionment. It also makes me feel disconnected from others. And hopelessness says, what are you going to do? I'm pretty settled in. And I wrote, I'm going to begin by becoming aware of you and then spending time intentionally replacing you with other more positive house guests. And so that was, I actually have a folder that I keep mine. Some people rip them up and they move on. Sometimes people, like, something else will come up and they'll dialogue with that at a future time. People use this in all kinds of ways. But what I hope you can see from that dialogue, which was my most recent, is that I could easily have I could have just stuck in the anger space. We can start there. Like, I'm just angry. I'm going to disengage. And I feel perfectly justified in doing this, which would have been bad for me and for the work that I do and for all the people around me. But I had awareness and I dug deeper into it. And now I have some intentionality of making sure I have moved out of that space. And I'm happy to say I have moved out of that space, even though I still struggle with it. And so that is just an example. And again, there's in the resources I'll be giving you, Dr. Gordon leads you through a video on how to do this, how to do that activity if you'd like to learn more about it. And so I always think it's important to point out the trauma-informed care approach itself, or I really moved into the healing-centered engagement approach. So it's that shift away when we're working with our children and our youth who've experienced toxic stress and trauma in their lives. It's moving away from looking at these children and youth as what's wrong with you, to not only what happened to you and how can I help, right? To what is right with you, to a really strengths-based model. That this in and of itself is a strategy. And I'm going to explain what I mean by this by reading a very short story out of a book, out of the book that I talked about, Self-Reg. It's actually called Under the Boab Tree, and that brings this point home, I hope, for all of you. It tends to resonate with teachers and caregivers. It certainly resonated with me the first time I read it. Recognized myself in the story, I guess, in my past work. And so it's called Under the Boab Tree. It'll take about 3 minutes to read. I think it's important to let you know how long you're sitting there listening to me tell a story. But storytelling is an important, connects to our emotions. And so storytelling can be a powerful vehicle of learning and growth. And so it's called Under the Boab Tree. This is an actual boab tree. I didn't know what one looked like. So that's what this is a picture of. And it's told from the point of view of Dr. Schenker, who wrote this book. And so this is the story that brings home why the trauma-informed care approach itself is a well-being self-care strategy as caregivers. So I need to put my glasses on because I am a woman of a certain age. Let's see. The most powerful lesson I have learned about how to break a stress cycle was during a trip to Australia. I was in the Pilbara in Western Australia with Michelle Scott, the Commissioner for Children, to see the work her agency was doing with various children's organizations. The Pilbara is an enormous region, ranging from vast beaches in the Indian Ocean to breathtaking rock formations and gorges in the interior. It is thought that this is where the first Aboriginals settled, sometime between 40,000 and 50,000 years ago, and the extraordinary natural environment continues to be a powerful presence. At a large dinner my first night, I arranged to meet Stan, an Aboriginal healer who worked with troubled teens. We met the following day at the local school in Roebourne, a small town of under 1,000, in a community where Aboriginal children struggle with significant hardships. Stan was a bear of a man, about 60 years old, with an air of quietness and compassion. He talked for a while about the kids he was working with, most of them because they had tried to harm themselves or someone else, or because they were battling some addiction. He asked me if I would like to see his clinic, and off we went for a 20-minute walk along Harding River through a natural area teeming with birds and wildlife. The clinic wasn't a building at all. It was a small clearing dominated by an ancient boab tree. The tree wasn't that tall, maybe 20 feet, but its girth was enormous. It would have taken at least 10 adults holding hands to surround it. The scene felt not just remote, but alien, as if we were the first humans ever to have set foot there. It wasn't quiet. On the contrary, it was filled with the clattering of kookaburras, herons, and other birds, yet it was the most peaceful setting I had ever encountered. Stan and I sat down side by side under the tree, which was in full bloom, and there we stayed, not talking, basking in the tranquility for I don't know how long. After a while, I found myself thinking about new strategies that we had never tried in our work. I felt suddenly refreshed, alert, and eager to think through these emerging ideas, hardly typical for the end of a very long day. When I mentioned this to Stan, he replied that this is precisely what he did with teens who were shut down or agitated. He would just patiently wait until they felt like talking. Eventually, they all opened up, although with some, this might take a full day. Then the two of them would quietly talk about what was troubling the teen and explore ways to manage his or her life. That tree was probably more than 1,500 years old, and I couldn't help but wonder how many thousands of youth had come there and found this equanimity in the calm company of this and other sage elders. What a clinic, what a lesson. When a child is in distress, we feel an almost reflexive need to try to reason it away. The problem is that the systems in the brain that he or she would need to process well-intentioned reasoning go offline when they're hyper-aroused or in stress response. He or she truly doesn't register what we're saying. The very first thing to do is bring those systems back online. Every child needs this experience of sitting side by side with us under a figurative boab tree. And when I first read this story, I immediately resonated with when I was a school social worker in a school and how people would turn to me as, when there was a student with stress behaviors in the classrooms to fix the child. And I felt it was my job to fix the child. But the trauma-informed care response shows us that it is not our jobs to fix anybody else. It's our job to hold spaces for each other, to understand each other's stories and draw out each other's strengths. And when we have those shifts as the caregivers, especially caregivers, the work in the fields that we do, it is a self-care strategy because we don't have that weight of being fixers anymore. We now understand our role as caregivers and how important it is that we are self-regulated to hold those spaces. And so I love that story. I hope it resonated with you as it did me. And so we are coming close to the end of this. And we're going to have a few more strategies and talk about kind of how you bring it back into your lives. But I will end as we're talking about the skills. There's an important skill that I think we so easily lose sight of, especially with lack of resources and stresses in our lives and all the things that can come at us. We forget why we chose to be in the roles that we do, whether it's work that we do or we're a foster parent or however you're coming to us today. Staying connected to our why is really, really important. And speaking it out loud in connection with one another in and of itself is something that we can never lose. And so I have a video that I love and I do in presentations all the time. We often have breakouts where people start talking about their whys and you just see people change. You see people as they change. So just take this video in. Hopefully it will play. Sandy, come on if you can't hear, if for some reason this doesn't work. I guess I'll send the video out, but I always worry that I'm listening to a video and the people on the other side are not listening to it.
This is called How Do I Know? And a lot of times when people hear the phrase, how do I know? The next thing they say is what? How do I know what? But the key really isn't to know what. The key is to know why. Because when you know your why, you have options on what your what can be. For instance, my why is to inspire people to walk in purpose. My what is stand-up comedy. My what is writing books. My what can be going out with some friends to eat. In fact, another what that has moved me towards my why is a web series that we have out now called Break Time. So every Wednesday at 3 o'clock, you should subscribe to the channel. We do a series called Break Time on YouTube. So 3 o'clock, we drop a new episode. One episode in particular, I'm about to show you a clip to. We were in Winston-Salem. So Break Time, this is how it works. I travel the country, I do stand-up comedy, probably an hour and a half at an event. And in the middle of my show, I'll just sit down and start talking to the audience. And funny just happens. or I'll meet somebody who's really interesting. So I met this one guy, and he said that he teaches music at a school. I was like, all right, you teach music, you know, can you sing? And then I'm just gonna show you the clip. Check it. So you're a musical director. Cool.
Yes, sir.
All right, so let me get a couple bars of like Amazing Grace. Can you do the first part of that? Go ahead.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
Wow. That bro could sing, you know what I'm saying? All right. Now, what you give me the version is if your uncle just got out of jail, you got shot in the back when you was a kid. I'm just saying, let me see the hood version real quick, if you know which version I'm talking about. Just see if that exists. Let me see what you got.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Right now I'm found, was blind, but now I see.
So here's the thing. The first time I asked him to sing, he knew what he was doing. The second time I asked him to sing, he knew why he was doing it. When you know your why, your what has more impact because you're walking in or towards your purpose.
And it also has a profound effect on your well-being when we feel like we're walking towards our purpose. I don't think I have to explain to all of you, but we can get really disconnected from our whys and the work that we do for all the reasons you all already know. And so I have a lot of people that often have taken this and taken it back into their work or their organizations, and they intentionally they start with this video, and we're going to continue to talk about, right, how we connect to our why, and how as an organization, we make sure that we are all staying, no matter what the lack of resources are or whatever's going on, that we stay connected to our why. So I think it's important to talk about that. There's something in the chat. Oh, good. I'm glad that you enjoyed that. I can send that if anybody has trouble finding it or they want that. Just please reach out to me. I'll have my information. I'm happy to share it. My slide is not changing. There. Let's see. What's that? Sorry about that. All right, so, and here's a strategy that has become one of my favorite strategies because I say yes to far too many things all the time. And I have learned to become much more discerning, whether it's a social engagement or it's the work that I'm gonna do, or it's even people in my lives. There's an activity that I have done that we don't have time to do today, but you can easily do on your own, where you just draw a circle and you draw all the people that give you life and you know, that really feed your well-being. And then kind of note, there might be one or two people that can really pull a lot out of you. And I'm not saying relationships aren't difficult and they're not worth engaging in and all of those things that we know, but sometimes we have to be aware in the work that we do, whether it's a colleague or a friend or a relative, where it's really moving into some spaces that deplete us and putting up boundaries on all of that. And it's important that we do this in intentional ways, or we can move quickly, you know, what's really priorities in our life and how are we actually spending our time and how is it affecting our well-being. So it's always important to acknowledge that. But as we begin to end this, it's important to note that we're all different human beings, and what self-regulates you in your life and cultivates self-awareness and calms your nervous system is going to be different than me, and it will also change the course of your life. But I will also encourage you to try some new things, right? To try to incorporate maybe some of the, whatever may have resonated with you today, even if it seems like it might feel a little uncomfortable. But just here, I continue to add to this because often when I'm with people, people start talking about what things really help to self-regulate them. And you see nature, physical movement and exercise, animals and pets. Gratitude is a big one. Time alone and time with people and volunteering. And we can kind of keep going on and on with all of those. And again, I know I'm kind of hammering this one in. We do these things on our own, but when we do them in connection with one another, when we create intentional spaces for well-being and wellness, again, not to fix each other, but to do some practices together, share practices with each other, and just talk about how stress is impacting us and the things that help to give us life. And we do this together and we do share our humanity with each other. We become not only well ourselves, we create cultures of well-being all around us. And so this is just a slide. Just think about those times in your life when you feel like you can bring your authentic self to the work you do or the social engagements that you have. What are the characteristics of those spaces? I need to add in here because I think an important one is not fixing each other and not offering advice. It's what we tend to do. And we do that in our friendships. I think I wouldn't say I've stopped that, but when we really have these spaces, how do we just hold each other in those spaces? And we can list those attributes because we've experienced them in our own lives. And so at the beginning of this presentation, we talked about through our stress response, we're wired for survival, right? First and foremost, our brains are wired for our survival. And so our stress response can easily take over in our lives, but we are also wired. The antidote to that is we're hardwired for connection and safety and love. We have innate resilience. We are wired for self-healing. Because connection, purpose, and feeling felt. We talk about this with our students in the schools. This is where well-being lies, but not only for them, for us. And so finally, this is really our last slide. We kind of, an action plan. I don't really love this word because it feels like more work for somebody to do that has a very serious plate. But I hope you feel empowered, like Sandy said at the beginning, to go into your lives and to do this in a way that doesn't feel like extra work. The first and foremost thing is commit to becoming more self-aware of how stress is impacting you in your body, in your spirit, in your relationships with other people, in your emotional well-being, and how you're functioning in your life. And start with some simple skills. I always say start with a breath. Do it, tie it to something you already do. Like if you make coffee in the morning, do some breathing in the morning. You drive kids around in the afternoon or something like that. Do it. Do 5 minutes while you drive. Take a walk and practice some mindfulness. Incorporate gratitude into that. Again, 20 minutes a day can change your brain. I encourage you to start noticing when you feel stuck and maybe bring in 1 or 2 of the other practices we've talked about today. But start small and give yourself grace. Let's see, do what feels right for you. Don't measure yourself against somebody else's practice or what's going on in their lives, and build a partner, find a community. I always like to acknowledge, we talked about how we're wired for self-healing and really flipping that model. We're promoting our own wellness and health and connection with one another, but we all sometimes need extra. You know, I'm a big proponent of a checkup from the neck up, and we need professionals sometimes. So it's always, I always want to acknowledge that and provide some resources. And this final slide is just, again, a reminder, this is not a checkbox or something that we just like, all right, well-being is done and we've moved on. It is a lifelong journey for all of us. It's not a destination. We're always growing and healing from and learning from our experiences. And again, give yourself grace while you're on that journey, but connect with one another on that journey, because connection, our relationships are really our primary space of well-being and resilience. And so with that, I know we only have a couple of minutes. I'm happy to stay here though, for anybody that has any questions. You will have my contact information at the end of the slides, but I'm tremendously grateful for your time today on this beautiful Friday, sunny morning, that you took some time for yourselves and spent it with me. And I'm very grateful to Sandy and Catherine as well for the invitation. So